The avoidant person is experiencing a profound recalibration of their understanding of who you are and what you're capable of, recognizing with growing discomfort and genuine shock that you are far more powerful and far more unpredictable than they ever perceived you to be during the relationship or immediately after its ending. This recognition is not abstract awareness, but is a visceral realization based on your actual behavior, your choices, your energy, and your responses that have completely contradicted the assumptions and predictions they made about how you would handle their patterns and their departure. The avoidant person operated throughout the relationship with specific beliefs about you that allowed them to feel safe and in control. They believed you were predictable in your devotion, that you would always pursue them when they withdrew, that you would tolerate their patterns indefinitely because you cared so much, that you needed them more than they needed you, that your emotional investment made you malleable and manageable, and that they could leave and return at will because you would always be there waiting. These beliefs gave them power and confidence in the dynamic, allowed them to maintain their defended position without fear of genuine loss, and permitted them to take you for granted because they believed they understood your responses and could control the relationship's terms through their withdrawal and their intermittent availability. But you have systematically destroyed every single one of these assumptions through your actual behavior since their departure or since you decided to change the dynamic. You did not pursue when they expected pursuit. You did not wait when they assumed waiting. You did not collapse when they anticipated collapse. You did not respond to their intermittent reach-outs with the eagerness or the forgiveness they counted on. You did not remain the same person they thought they knew and could predict. Instead, you have demonstrated power they didn't know you possessed, the power to walk away completely, the power to revoke their access without explanation or negotiation, the power to move forward with your life in ways that don't include space for them, the power to be genuinely indifferent where they expected ongoing emotional engagement, and the power to choose yourself over the relationship in ways they never thought you capable of. And you have demonstrated unpredictability that has completely undermined their sense of understanding you or being able to anticipate your moves. They cannot predict whether you'll respond to them. They cannot anticipate your next choice. They cannot rely on your previous patterns to forecast your behavior, and they cannot assume anything about your current state or your future actions because you have become someone operating from a completely different framework than the one they thought they understood. This combination of power and unpredictability is creating profound disorientation and anxiety in the avoidant person because it means they've lost the control and the predictability they relied on, because it reveals they fundamentally misunderstood who you are and what you're capable of, and because it makes you simultaneously more attractive and more threatening than you've ever been to them. The power shift that completely disrupted their control. The avoidant person is experiencing recognition that a fundamental power shift has occurred in the dynamic between you, a shift that has completely disrupted the control they believed they held and that has left them in the unfamiliar and deeply uncomfortable position of being the less powerful person, the one who wants something they cannot have, the one who is affected while the other person remains unmoved. Understanding this power shift and how it occurred reveals both the mechanisms of your transformation and the depth of their miscalculation about who held power in the relationship. Throughout the relationship, the avoidant person held what felt like total control over the dynamic. They controlled the distance, deciding when to pull closer and when to withdraw. They controlled the pace, determining how quickly or slowly the relationship progressed. They controlled the emotional temperature, choosing when to be warm and when to be cold. They controlled the commitment level, deciding what they were willing to offer and what they were withholding. This control gave them enormous power because it meant you were constantly adapting to their changes, responding to their withdrawals, trying to understand their patterns, and working to maintain connection. They could sever the connection at any moment. The power dynamic was clear. They acted, you reacted. They led, you followed. They set the terms, you accepted or struggled against them. This power felt secure to them because they believed it was based on a fundamental difference in investment and need. You needed them more than they needed you. so you would always be the one working harder, caring more, and being more affected by what happened between you. But this power was actually built on a false foundation, on their misunderstanding of your investment as neediness, your patience as weakness, and your caring as dependency. They confused your choice to invest in the relationship with an inability to walk away, confused your willingness to work through difficulties with an inability to set boundaries, and confused your emotional openness with emotional fragility. These confusions led them to believe they had more power than they actually had, that your position was weaker than it actually was, and that the balance between you was more tilted in their favor than reality supported. The power they felt was partly real. Their willingness to withdraw did create certain dynamic advantages, but it was partly illusion based on their inability to accurately perceive your actual strength and your actual choices. The power shift began the moment you stopped playing the role they expected, the moment you refused to pursue when they withdrew, the moment you created boundaries that prevented their return on their terms, and the moment you demonstrated that you could and would walk away completely rather than accepting the breadcrumbs they were offering. This shift wasn't gradual or negotiated. It was sudden and total. A complete reversal where the person who had been responding to their moves became the person making moves they couldn't predict or control, where the person who had been affected by their withdrawal became the person whose presence or absence affected them, and where the person who had been seeking connection became the person who was unreachable and unavailable. The specific mechanism of the power shift was your withdrawal of emotional investment and your redirection of that investment toward yourself and your own life. The avoidant person's power was based on your investment in them and in the relationship. As long as you cared deeply about them and about making the relationship work, they had leverage over you through your own caring. But when you withdrew your investment, when you stopped caring whether they came back or stayed away, when you redirected your considerable emotional energy toward your own healing and growth rather than toward them, their leverage disappeared. They no longer had anything to bargain with, no way to affect you, and no control over your emotional state or your choices. The power that came from your investment evaporated the moment you divested, leaving them with no mechanism to influence you or to bring you back into the dynamic they controlled. The power shift is evident in the reversal of who is thinking about whom. During the relationship and immediately after, you were the one thinking constantly about them, analyzing their behavior, trying to understand their patterns, and wondering if they would come back or change or choose you. Your mental and emotional energy was consumed with them. But now, they're the one thinking constantly about you, wondering what you're doing, analyzing your choices, trying to understand your transformation, and questioning whether there's any chance you take them back. The obsessive thinking has shifted from you to them, and this shift represents a transfer of power because the person who is preoccupied is the person who is more affected, more invested, and more lacking in control. The power shift is evident in the reversal of who is pursuing whom. You pursued connection, pursued understanding, and pursued the relationship throughout the difficult times when they were withdrawing. Your pursuit gave them the power to grant or withhold what you were seeking. But now, if any pursuit is happening, it's them attempting to reach you, them trying to get your attention, and them hoping for some response or acknowledgement. And your lack of response, your disinterest in their pursuit, and your unwillingness to engage create a complete reversal where they're experiencing the powerlessness of pursuing someone who won't be caught, someone who isn't interested in what they're offering, someone who has moved beyond caring about the outcome of their pursuit. The power shift is evident in who controls access and availability. The avoidant controlled their own availability throughout the relationship, deciding when they were available and when they weren't, and when they would respond, and when they would create distance. This control over access was a major source of their power. But now you control access to yourself, to your time, to your attention, and to your emotional energy. You decide if they can contact you, and the answer is generally no. You decide if you'll respond to their attempts to reach out, and the answer is generally no. You decide if they have any place in your life, and the answer is no. This control over access has shifted entirely to you, and they're experiencing the powerlessness of wanting access to someone who has closed all the doors and who won't open them regardless of what they say or do. The power shift is evident in the emotional impact each person is experiencing. During the relationship, you were the one who was emotionally impacted by their behavior, hurt by their withdrawal, confused by their inconsistency, anxious about their unavailability, and devastated when they ended things or created distance. Your emotional reactivity gave them power because it proved they mattered, proved they could affect you, and proved they had something you wanted that they could withhold. But now, the emotional impact has reversed. You appear calm, grounded, and unaffected by their absence or their presence, while they're the one experiencing emotional turmoil, missing you, regretting their choices, anxious about having lost you, and devastated by your indifference and your unavailability. The emotional impact has shifted to them, and with it has gone much of the power because being the person who is emotionally affected is being the person in the weaker position. The avoidant person is recognizing this power shift with a mixture of shock, admiration, resentment, and anxiety. They're shocked because they never anticipated you were capable of this kind of power move, this complete withdrawal and repositioning. They're experiencing grudging admiration because the strength and the decisiveness you're demonstrating is attractive and impressive, even as it works against their interests. They're resentful because the power shift means they've lost control and an advantage they relied on, and because your transformation makes them look weak or foolish in comparison. And they're anxious because they have no framework for how to operate without the power they previously held, no strategy that works when the other person is truly unavailable and truly uninterested, and no way to regain the control that has shifted entirely to you. The recognition that you are more powerful than they ever understood and that this power is now directed away from them rather than toward connection with them is fundamentally destabilizing their sense of the relationship, of you, and of themselves. How your unpredictability shattered. Their script about you beyond recognizing your power. The avoidant person is deeply unsettled by your unpredictability, by the recognition that you are not who they thought you were and that you do not behave according to the patterns and scripts they believed they understood about you. This unpredictability is not randomness, but is your demonstration of depth, complexity, and autonomous agency that completely contradicts the simplified and somewhat dismissive understanding they had of you. Understanding how your unpredictability is manifesting and why it's so disorienting to them reveals both the narrowness of their perception and the magnitude of your transformation. The avoidant person had a script for you, a set of predictions about how you would respond to their behavior based on their observations during the relationship. The script said, when they withdraw, you pursue. When they're cold, you try harder to be warm. When they push you away, you eventually come back for more. When they create distance, you respect it but remain available. When they reach out after silence, you respond with relief and openness. When they end things, you protest and try to change their mind, but ultimately accept it while remaining hopeful for their return. This script was based on patterns you did exhibit during the relationship, behaviors that were understandable and human responses to their avoidant patterns. But the script was also reductive, treating you as a predictable entity whose responses could be anticipated and managed rather than as a complex person with a full range of choices and capacities. Your unpredictability emerged when you completely abandoned this script and started operating from an entirely different framework that the avoidant person didn't see coming. When they withdrew expecting pursuit, you didn't pursue. You mirrored their distance, or you ended things yourself. When they were cold, expecting you to try harder, you became equally cold, or you simply stopped engaging. When they pushed you away, expecting eventual return, you stayed away and built a life without them. When they created distance, expecting you to wait, you filled that distance with your own growth and movement forward. When they reached out after silence, expecting relief and openness, you either didn't respond at all or responded with polite disinterest that communicated they no longer mattered to you. When they ended things, expecting protest, followed by sad acceptance, you accepted immediately and completely, cutting off all contact and moving forward without looking back. Each of these departures from the script they expected was a shock to their system, a contradiction to their understanding of you, and evidence that they had fundamentally misread who you are and what you're capable of. The unpredictability is evident in your emotional responses, which are completely different from what they anticipated. They expected you to be devastated, to be openly hurt, and to be struggling visibly with the loss. They expected your pain to be apparent and ongoing, to see evidence that their absence was creating suffering for you. But instead, you appear fine. You appear calm, even happy. You appear to have moved on with an ease that they didn't think you possessed. This emotional response, or apparent lack of the response they expected, is deeply unpredictable to them because it contradicts everything they understood about your investment in the relationship and your feelings for them. If you cared as much as they believed you did, you should be suffering more, should be more visibly affected, and should be showing signs of the devastation they caused. The fact that you're not showing these signs creates cognitive dissonance that forces them to question either whether you ever cared as much as they thought or whether you're far stronger and more resilient than they gave you credit for. The unpredictability is evident in your choices and your life direction, which have diverged from any trajectory they anticipated. They might have expected you to stay stuck for a while, to struggle with dating, and to remain somewhat fixated on them and the relationship. But instead, you're thriving. You're pursuing goals with renewed energy. You're possibly in a new relationship that appears healthy and fulfilling, and you're making life choices that demonstrate you've completely moved past them and past the relationship. You're creating a future that has no space for them and that doesn't appear to be waiting for their potential return. This life trajectory is unpredictable because it shows you don't need them for your happiness or your completeness, that you're fully capable of building a meaningful and satisfying life without them, and that losing them was not the catastrophe to your life trajectory that they perhaps unconsciously hoped it would be. The unpredictability is evident in your responses to their attempts at contact or reconnection, which don't follow any pattern they can discern or predict. Sometimes you don't respond at all. Sometimes you respond, but with such formal distance that it's clear you're not interested in real conversation. Sometimes you respond with friendliness that's somehow more distancing than coldness would be, because it makes clear you've categorized them as someone who no longer holds significance beyond a polite acquaintance. They cannot predict which response they'll get or what would trigger a different response. This unpredictability in your responses means they have no strategy that reliably works, no approach they can take that will get them the outcome they want, and no way to manipulate or manage the interaction because they cannot anticipate how you'll react. The unpredictability is evident in what affects you and what doesn't, which is completely different from the pattern they thought they understood. They expected you to be affected by their presence, by seeing them, by hearing about them through mutual friends, and by any indication they were thinking about you. But you appear genuinely unaffected. Seeing them doesn't seem to destabilize you. Hearing about them doesn't seem to create an emotional reaction, and knowing they're thinking about you doesn't seem to matter to you. Meanwhile, things they didn't think would matter to you, your own goals, your own growth, your own life independent of them, seem to be what actually affects you and drives your choices. This reversal of what matters to you is unpredictable because it shows they didn't actually understand what you value or what motivates you, that they projected their own framework onto you rather than understanding your actual priorities and drivers. The unpredictability is evident in your apparent indifference to things they thought you cared deeply about, particularly to them and to the relationship. They thought the relationship mattered enormously to you, they thought they mattered enormously to you, and they thought you would carry a torch for them indefinitely, would remain at least somewhat emotionally entangled with them, and would care about whether they were happy or whether they found someone else, or whether they regretted their choices. But your behavior suggests complete indifference to all of this. You don't seem to care if they're happy or suffering, you don't seem to care if they're with someone else, and you don't seem to care if they regret losing losing you or if they're desperately wishing they could return. This indifference is the ultimate unpredictability because it means you've moved to a place emotionally where they simply don't register as important, where their choices and their state don't affect you, and where you've genuinely stopped caring in ways they never anticipated you could stop caring. The avoidant person is deeply unsettled by your unpredictability because it means they don't understand you, cannot predict you, cannot anticipate your moves or your responses, and therefore cannot develop a strategy for managing the situation or for potentially getting you back if they decided they wanted to try. Unpredictability creates anxiety because humans crave the ability to predict and understand, and the avoidant person has lost all ability to predict you or to feel confident they understand who you are and what you're capable of. The person they thought they knew has been revealed as an inaccurate perception, and the person you actually are is unknown to them, operating from motivations and with capabilities they never recognized. This shattering of their script about you is forcing them to recognize they never really knew you at all, that their understanding was superficial and based on their projections rather than on accurate perception of who you actually are, and that they're dealing with someone far more complex, far more capable, and far more autonomous than they ever gave you credit for being. The specific behaviors that revealed your hidden strength. The avoidant person's recognition of your power and unpredictability is based on specific behaviors and choices you've made that revealed strength, autonomy, and capacity they didn't know you possessed. These behaviors have served as wake-up calls, evidence that contradicts their previous perception and forces them to recalibrate their understanding of who you are and what you're capable of. Understanding these specific revelatory behaviors illuminates both what you did that was so impactful and why these behaviors are affecting the avoidant so profoundly. The first revelatory behavior was your immediate and complete acceptance when they ended things or when they withdrew significantly, accepting without fight or negotiation or attempts to change their mind. The avoidant expected resistance. They expected you to try to convince them to stay, to make a case for the relationship, and to become emotional and plead with them. This expectation was based on their perception that you were highly invested and that you needed the relationship. But instead, you accepted their decision with a calm that shocked them. You didn't fight, you didn't beg, you didn't try to negotiate a different outcome. You simply accepted what they said and moved toward ending with dignity and composure. This behavior revealed strength they didn't expect, strength to let go of something you wanted, strength to accept loss without collapsing, and strength to respect their stated choice even when it hurt you. The immediate acceptance communicated that while you cared about them and the relationship, you cared about yourself and your dignity more, that you weren't going to debase yourself by fighting for someone who was clearly communicating they didn't want to be fought for. The second revelatory behavior was your implementation of complete no contact without explanation or gradual transition, cutting them off entirely from access to you. The avoidant expected you would want to stay friends, would maintain some contact, and would leave the door open for future possibility. They expected a gradual fade or maintained connection at a reduced level, but instead, you blocked them on social media, didn't respond to messages, and created total unavailability that left no opening for them to drift back in. This behavior revealed strength to create and maintain firm boundaries. Strength to prioritize your healing over their comfort, and strength to make a clean break rather than prolonging a connection that wasn't serving you. The complete no contact communicated that you understood what you needed to heal and that you were willing to do what was necessary, even if it felt harsh or even if it meant permanently closing a door they might want to walk back through.